which will then be followed by a wrap-up of great resources that have been presented for the past year, and which we would encourage you to look into if you have any further questions on anything we've covered since this past fall. Today, Michael Hope from Preservica will start the program and lead us through the resources. Michael has worked in IT and information management for over 25 years, and his recent focus as marketing director for Preservica has been to raise awareness of the importance of digital preservation, including devising and running education programs in partnership with groups such as CoSA. We'll start our archive discussions with Alan Ramsey from Connecticut State Library. Alan is the Assistant State Archivist and oversees the State Archive's acquisition, arrangement, description, and preservation of state and local government records and non-governmental records of enduring value pertaining to the history and heritage of Connecticut. We'll then hear from Brian Collars from the South Carolina Department of Archives and History. He currently serves as the supervisor of the Electronic Records and Imaging Services branches for the South Carolina Department of Archives and History, managing their implementation and creation of a trusted digital repository. Brian also serves as a member of the State Electronic Records Initiative, or SERI, Education Committee. We'll then wrap up with Dr. Lisa Spear and Mary Dunn from the Arkansas State Archives. Dr. Spear has been the director of the Arkansas State Archives since June 2013. Prior to that, she was head of special collections at Southeast Missouri State University and has worked in archives and special collections divisions at the University of Mississippi and the University of Alabama. Mary is the archival manager for technology and access for the Arkansas State Archives and is primarily responsible for keeping the State Archives website up to date and accurate, updating records databases, uploading archival collection finding aids, and establishing the Archives Budding State Electronic Records Preservation Program. If, while we're going through the presentation, you have any questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat box along the right side. We'll leave time at the end of the webinar so we can get to as many questions as possible. Also, at the end, there will be a survey when you close your browser, and with every completed survey, you will win a copy of today's presentation. Isn't that exciting? And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Michael.
Okay, great. Thank you, Camille. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. And a special big thank you to Alan, Brian, Lisa, and Mary. I'm looking forward to hearing you share experiences of digital preservation in a little while. Before then, as Camille said, I'll do a short introduction and look at some of the resources, tools, and some of the hints and tips that we've looked at in this session, as well as some of the resources that we've used when we've worked with other archiving groups, such as the Archivers and Records Association in the UK. I'll then hand over to Alan, Brian, Lisa, and Mary, so you can understand how other states and how other organizations have approached the challenge of digital preservation, and hopefully we'll get some good sharing and some good questions coming out of that. And then I'll just summarize at the end, and we'll open for questions. And as Camille was saying, keep your questions coming in through the chat box. We'll make sure we'll go back and answer all those at the end of the session. So just a quick reminder of why we kind of all here. It's all about digital content and the fragility of digital content, which we've looked at extensively throughout the series, and it's amazing that we did kick this off in the fall of last year, and now here we are in the summertime, and things have moved quickly, and I hope those who've joined us up to now have enjoyed the series. But as I said, it's all about the fragility of digital content, and in particular the risk of technology obsolescence, whether that's hardware, operating system, software, or indeed file formats themselves becoming obsolete. And I think we've covered in several other sessions that this risk, because of technology refresh rates, can affect any content which is older than 10 years or already is 10 years old. The risk being that you can't actually necessarily find it, use it, or necessarily trust that information. Interestingly, we recently did some research. Some of you may have seen this with the Information Governance Initiative, which is a sort of information governance think tank in the US. And these are just some of the findings. So 98% of, I think we surveyed around 400 information records and information records managers, and 98% of them said that they had records, digital information, which they need to keep for 10 years or longer, or indeed on a permanent basis. So it's a pretty universal challenge for most organizations. But interestingly, the awareness of the fragility of digital content is also very high. So 97% in the survey said that they were aware that technology obsolescence can put long-term digital records at risk of not being usable and readable in the future. So one thing you might want to do if you haven't got a copy of the sort of full report as yet is, as a useful resource, is to take a look at that. You can find it on the Preservica website. So it was a piece of sort of research which we supported, but it was done by the Information Governance Alliance Initiative, sorry. And the main reason why, or one of the reasons why you might want to look at that is that you can benchmark yourself against other organizations, but also if you're looking to get stakeholder or budget holder buy-in, then some of the findings of the report are quite hard-hitting and useful to share with the senior managers and stakeholders to get buy-in to your program. So as I said, we have also been running similar workshops and webinars in the UK. Here's a picture of our London workshop, which we ran recently. And the great thing is in the UK, we can all get together. There's about 50 of us got together in London. We can do face-to-face training. And the interesting thing is we did a straw poll there and said to everybody, who needs digital preservation? And again, about 100% of the people's hands went up in the room. But then the next question was, now how do I actually get buy-in from my stakeholders and my senior management and the budget holders to get them to believe that this is important for the organization going forward. So we began to address that in some of the workshops we ran in the UK, and we covered, one workshop was on the 5-step digital preservation journey, and in fact you could go and review this on the Preservica website if you look at the consulting tab up on the top navigation. But it's a useful framework for getting buy-in and for a digital preservation program, and looking at it as a whole and trying to break it down into all the things you need to do to be successful in terms of you getting buy-in, getting a solution, and then deploying the solution, etc. The interesting thing is that a lot of organizations tend to start at step 3. They go, oh, what solution do I need? And then they look at different tools and they download Droid, and you very quickly spend a lot of time looking at the solution. But the key to getting buy-in is to really take a couple of steps back, pull a business case together, and a lot of that business case can be predicated on step 1, which is what do I actually need to preserve, what is the size and scope of this challenge, and what is the sort of content and material and information and records that that are so valuable to the organization that we need to look after long term. So in terms of building the case, these are the sort of things you might want to consider. As I said, what do I actually need to preserve or look after for the long term in a repository to give the whole thing size and scope? What are the risks, consequences, and benefits to the organization of not looking after that content properly? How does our organization shape up? Is a way of benchmarking ourselves against other similar organizations. And a good way of doing that is asking, what are other organizations doing? In this case, it's great that 3 state archives to come forward to share how they went about getting a digital preservation program off the ground. And then finally, any stakeholders obviously going to ask, how much, I believe you, how much is this all going to cost? So just some pointers on, what do I need and how much it will cost. So quickly, in terms of some resources that you might find useful, so what do I need to preserve? So it's looking at the size, scale, and scope of the challenge. Most organizations will do either what's called an electronic record survey or digital asset audit register. Some of you will probably have already done this as part of the DPCMM initiative, SERI initiative. So what content, what format, and where is it stored? And interestingly, again, coming back to the IGI survey that we commissioned, then 68% of the respondents said that a lot of their content, as well as being stored on USB drives, etc., 68% said it was stored on shared network drives, which is obviously not an ideal place to keep stuff, both from a long-term preservation perspective as well as a governance and control and security perspective. So do an audit. One tip is to engage with other departments. So reach out to other departments, other agencies to build your case, and we'll see some examples of that as our speakers talk in a short while. And that can help you build a stronger return on investments. You can say, well, it's not just this content, it's a whole bunch of other content which we can look after, and against the cost of looking after that content. And also another tip is not to try and boil the ocean, but to look for some high-profile quick wins which will resonate with your organization and with your senior management. So next thing is to look at what are the risks of losing that content and what are the consequences of losing that content. And this is another useful tool which you might, in terms of building your case, you might find useful. It's called the Digital Value at Risk Calculator, which you can download from the Preservica website. And again, it's a nice visual way of mapping out where you might want to put your focus, but also a visual way of showing your stakeholders which content is most at risk. So it basically does a sort of audit. You have a spreadsheet, and then it can actually show this as an output. So you can look at the consequence of loss versus the risk of loss. And obviously up in the top right-hand corner is looking at the heat map, content which is likely to be lost because it's not stored in a good place or it's in a bad format. And the consequences of losing it are catastrophic, is a good place to focus the lines of stakeholders. So the next thing I want to do is actually try and put some actually quantify some of those risks and consequences, put some money, hard money behind them, or so for example, if we don't look after this information, this particular type of record, we might be failing to meet mandate, or we're being exposed to legal or financial liabilities. If it's compliance and we can't produce the information, it might be a very large regulatory fine we face. It might just be reputational damage if your reputation is to look after historical information. There's a whole cost of redigitization if you spent a lot on that and now the information that is lost or is not in a format which can be read. So there's a cost there. Born digital material can be lost forever, and of course there's also a loss of knowledge within the organization. But it's not all doom and gloom. There's also benefits you can build into your business case. So making the case for digital information, so transparency is a good way of making the case. Enabling future use, you can see all the sort of things there which allow you to sort of quantify benefits of doing digital preservation and having a digital preservation system. One last thing then before I hand over to speakers. Many of you will have been involved in the digital preservation capability maturity assessments in the past. There's a guide on the Preservica website, which if you haven't read it, you might find useful. And there's also a scorecard, which I think is at digitalok.org, although I looked at that just before I came on the webinar and the website didn't seem to be up anymore. But if you want to get hold of it, you can contact Laurie Ashley or Charles Dollar at securelyrooted.com. And essentially it's another good tool for working with budget holders and stakeholders to show them in a very simple way, from the red lights to the green lights, how your organization is shaping up against a whole bunch of components for measuring digital preservation capability. So finally, Sarah told me we had to mention the Pertz Portal. Again, there's lots of information up on the Pertz Portal in terms of tools to help you assess what you're doing, as well, obviously, these training sessions, and also ways of defining policy, etc. So you can go up there and find lots of tools and information to help you. So finally, one key thing is to talk to other organizations who may be in a similar situation to yourselves and find out how did they get buy-in, what their experiences are, and that's the whole point of the this webinar today. So we'll be hearing from Alan, from Brian, from Lisa, and Mary about their experiences. But there's also a whole bunch of other state archives who are doing digital preservation and have got the backing and the buy-in from their organizations to move ahead. In a biased way, I've obviously listed out all of the Preservica users on there, but I'm sure most of those will be happy to speak to you. I think there's now 17 states using Preservica, so it's quite a vibrant community, and they're always happy to share. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over now to our panel of speakers, starting with Alan from Connecticut. So thank you, Alan, for joining us, and looking forward to hearing what you've got to say about your experiences.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about the Connecticut Digital Archive, which is a collaboration between the University of Connecticut Libraries, Connecticut State Library, and Connecticut Cultural Heritage Organizations. Let's see here. So the first thing is, what is the Connecticut Digital Archive? The Connecticut Digital Archive is dedicated to the maintenance, delivery, and preservation of a wide range of digital resources for educational and cultural institutions and state agencies in the state of Connecticut. It is a digital repository built on the OIS reference model and is striving to meet the Trusted Digital Repository standards and comply with those as we work towards that, achieving that. Participation is open to all educational, cultural, and memory institutions in the state of Connecticut that have a mission to preserve and make available historically valuable resources and records. And there's two governance pieces to the CTDA. One is the advisory committee, which is made up of colleagues and peers from the cultural heritage, digital preservation, and academic communities in Connecticut, and represents a wide variety of talents, knowledge, and perspectives. The committee meets quarterly to share its experiences and provide advice on CTDA services and programs. The other one is the technical roadmap discussion group. They meet every fourth Monday, both in person and virtually, and they really talk about charting the short and long-term technical infrastructure of the CTDA. And so focusing from that, talk a little bit about the infrastructure. It's built on Fedora repository software. We use Islandora to provide administration, discovery, and presentation layers, otherwise known to us as channels, and the channels are built on Drupal. It has a handle system for that unique persistent identifier, and you don't necessarily aren't required to buy a channel. You could just put your stuff in there for preservation, or even bypass it, and I'll talk a little bit later about, hopefully in the next integration of Fedora, we'll be able to bypass Islandora to a large degree. I want to talk a little bit today, though, about how we got to where we're at today. So back in 2011, a few things happened. One thing that happened was that the state library was tasked with Public Act 11150, which tasked us with the state librarian with establishing standards and guidelines for the preservation and authentication of electronic documents. He chose to have an internal task force, and we came up with 6 recommendations. I'm not going to go into those today, but there's a link in my further information slides. Also in late 2011, state librarian heard about Greg Colati, who's the Associate University Librarian over the University Archives and Special Collections, his digital preservation initiative. And Greg brings a lot of experience from his previous tenors at his other jobs with digitization and digital repositories. So from that discussion, we were able to, the state librarian and us and a lot of different groups and stakeholders were able to have discussions throughout 2012, 2013, such as what are we going to name it, how much storage do we need, what are we going to do for management. We spent a whole day discussing how we would build a management piece, and I think that's partially why we turned to Islandora. On November 13th, 2013, the CTD launched with 20,000 digital objects from one collection at the University Archives. In 2014, 2015, we began ingesting digital objects into in our presentation channel went live. At the same time in 2014, the Uniform Electronic Legal Material Act was passed, which allows certain things to be strictly published in electronic format. And one of these that has proceeded from that has been the regulations of the Connecticut state agencies. And on your right, you'll see a screenshot of our presentation channel of a screenshot of the regulation. The process works in such a way that things are moved from their IBM FileNet repository to the CTD, an automated process through a watch folder. So this is our first test and foray into automating pretty much everything from beginning to end. And so far it's worked pretty well. All we have to do pretty much every year is set up a folder. The CTD did all the mapping between the FileNet metadata and the mods metadata, because everything in the digital repository has to have a mods record. And near the end of 2014, the repository reached 100,000 digital object ingest mark from all of its participants. In 2016, the state librarian convened an internal steering group committee to advise on moving our digital assets from our platforms such as ContentDM and Flickr to the CTD. We very roughly estimate, because we haven't quite got a grasp on this, we have about 1 million digital objects, or at least 9 terabytes or more of items to ingest into the CTDA. Currently, there's 40 participant institutions. We had our first annual CTDA Participants Day a couple weeks ago, and this was really similar to a user group. We voted on topics. We had breakout sessions. We were able to share our experiences. About 20 to 25 participants were there. And then we were able to experience the advisory committee, their quarterly meeting, and learn more about future developments of what's going to be happening in the future, looking towards the future. One is external batch ingest next year, which is right now you can only go through Islandora, you can only ingest 2 gigabytes of data. So that's been a challenge, because if you have a video of 6 gigabytes, you can't break up a video very easily. They'll be migrating to upgrading to Fedora 4 at sometime in 2018, which will allow a lot more promising to allow a lot more open APIs to the repository itself. On the architecture side, moving storage to university servers, because right now I believe they sit on university library servers, so kind of moving them off to a centrally managed area. And then going to a third location redundancy through the Academic Preservation Trust, which is a member of the Digital Preservation Network. Some advice and lessons. One that we always like to say is to partner with institutions that have similar missions. So 40 of us so far, we have very similar missions. We have a very similar mission to the University of Connecticut libraries to preserve and make things accessible. One that I've come around to recently has been, in the last year or so, is collaboration with information technology. And this I find very important, because they bring certain things to the table about networking and storage and hardware and things like that, that experience, that expertise. At the same time, we get to educate them a little bit about the importance of digital preservation and the importance of electronic records, which a lot of them understand, but just kind of engaging with them and kind of using them as another source of champions, potentially. The other thing that I'm going to cover here is that proximity to CTDA staff. We are about 40 minutes away from the university's up in Stores, so I can't just walk down the hall and talk to the CTDA staff. So as cropping of the First Participants Day, we decided to relaunch our Google group to communicate more in like a more listserv environment. They also put out a newsletter every month, and there's a few other little lists and things, and they do some workshops. So communication, I feel, has improved, but I can't just walk down the hall and talk to them. And these are just a few slides of further information. If you want to dive more into it, this is all links to CTDA and stuff and its policies, and they use a development board called Trello. And then state library resources and things that might be of interest. And here's my contact information, and if you have any questions, we'll take those at the end, but thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alan. Over to you, Brian.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and good afternoon, and thank you for hosting this. I was asked to speak about how we came to how South Carolina decided upon an electronic records repository. And so I'm going to take a brief couple of slides here to talk about that, and then answer some stuff about where we are and our experiences with that. So just a brief bit of history, how we conjured something from nothing actually is background. I started working in the field back in 1993. Where there was there's a lot of theory but very little practice. Anybody who's been around the profession for a while can tell you about Camp Pitt. And in the ensuing years up until the 2000s, we had a lot of starts and stops, end-dip, pedals. Then in 2008, as we all know, we get slides work, boom, the economy ruptured, and we were left with nothing. We had this the South Carolina Department of Archives and History had exactly one person working on electronic records. That was me, and I was trying to keep abreast with all the ongoing practices and theory and what was going on within the profession. But it was hard to do that considering I'm a paper-based trained archivist. In any event, 6 long years later, in 2014, we had a new attempt at electronic records. What prompted this was transparency, the Tea Party movement. I can't get the slides to function. There we go. In 2009, we had a new director who came on board at the department who was focused entirely upon electronic records, recognized the need for us to be doing something, although the funds weren't there. And in 2014, the legislature, well, the governor tried to push a transparency agenda and open up the records of the individual legislators, and the South Carolina Department of Archives and History realized that while we hadn't scheduled these records before, it was going to be a huge impact if they did become available, and we used it as a leverage to indicate that we needed more funds for technology, specifically electronic records generating out of the General Assembly, to give us at least hardware to deal with this problem should it become available. And luckily enough, we were able to get a new SAN system to enable us to store those records. Ultimately, the legislature decided not to open up their records, which is sort of funny, but we got the hardware anyways. An anecdote that came out of that was that the governor's office approved the budget for the hardware, but vetoed the budget for the people to run the hardware. So we had to make a plea to the legislature to allow us to actually get the people to run the system, and we used the argument that they provided us a plane but didn't provide us any pilots, and that went over well in the legislature. The hardware was installed in August of 2015, and we then needed an archivist to run that, and so we or at least work within the system. We were able to hire a new state electronic records archivist in early 2016. I'm sorry, we actually hired them in June 2014. He came on board, and we began at that point looking at models of electronic records repositories, and which culminated with us in 2015 instituting the Electronic Records Archive, which is a Preservica decision. But the plan essentially was, come on, run. We needed to, before we made a decision, we had to go through these steps to determine what we were going to do. We did research and literature review. We wrote beginning of our TDR, electronic records policy. We did testing and evaluation. We self-assessed where we were at as an organization in terms of digital preservation, married that with testing of digital preservation systems out there, whether it be Archimatica, Drupal. We spent 6 long months testing everything you can imagine underneath the sun. And then eventually we made a final recommendation and acquisition of what we went with, which was Preservica. And so once we did all the testing, they were grouped into categories, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. And then eventually we came up with the decision of going with the Tier 1 process, or Tier 1 repository, which was Preservica. In terms of our experiences since that decision to go with Preservica in late spring of 2015, we've had some fits and starts with it. The system actually runs really well. The ability to contact Preservica for technical difficulties and things is one of the reasons that swayed us to it. But we're having difficulty getting buy-in from the agencies. Most of them have gone so long as we struggled with electronic records that are now wanting to see us as a repository for backup rather than preservation, and convincing the agencies or our stakeholders that we're a preservation plan, not a backup plan, has been very, very difficult, and getting buy-in from them has been extremely difficult. We have had some success with our Department of Health and Environmental Control and their birth certificates, which opened up for the first time in 100 years this past spring. We were able to ingest 56,000 birth certificates for the first time in the state's history, so those are open and available to the public right now. We've also had some success working, collaborating with other like-minded state agencies and advisory panels, such as there's a state agency panel dealing with personally identifiable information and helping agencies secure that information. And we work closely with them who are to educate agencies on what the department can do and what it can't do, and how important and vital it is for them to preserve their records in a fully integrated repository. And that's about where we're at right now. We've had some success, some not success, but it's a process, and it's important to get out there and make yourself visible, and then, be proactive. We found agencies are not coming to us. We have to actually go out to the agencies and try and secure the records from them, because they're hesitant about shifting that stuff to us after having so long dealt with it in-house. And so I'll turn it over to Lisa and Mary now.
Good afternoon, everybody. My colleague Mary Dunn and I appreciate this opportunity to talk about the Arkansas State Archives and our very recent experience in bringing up Preservica. If you're having any difficulty hearing either Mary or myself, just shoot us a message in the chat box. We'll keep an eye on it. To understand some of the particular challenges that we've faced, you need to know a little bit about the state records retention and preservation situation in Arkansas. It's kind of unique. Essentially, we are attempting to work with state agencies on the preservation of their records without an adequate mandate. And keep in mind when I say records that I'm generically talking about electronic records as well as paper-based documents. Our agency was established as the Arkansas History Commission in 1905 and charged with preserving the official records of Arkansas. However, no systematic approach for dealing with state records was put in place for 90 years. I'll repeat that. No systematic approach for dealing with state records was put in place for 90 years. It wasn't until Jim Guy Tucker's governorship that a state records management and preservation program was created by law, and that was 1995. Unfortunately, the funding that would have added the necessary manpower and resources to manage a records retention program didn't follow the Act. And so one of my predecessors, Dr. John Ferguson, who directed the commission for 45 years, had Act 905 of 1995 repealed in 2005. So the state records preservation program never really took a firm hold. And for the intervening 11 years since Act 905 was repealed, state records retention in Arkansas has been hit or miss at best. Although there are state records retention policies, they're governed by another agency, the Department of Finance and Administration, and the staff at the state archives played almost no role in developing them 10 years ago. And again, I'm talking about both electronic and paper-based records. The schedules make no mention of permanent disposition of records in the state archives, and they apply to only the most common types of records, and again, they're now 10 years old. State agencies are left to develop whatever type of record-keeping systems work best for them, and it varies between agencies from having no system at all in place to agencies that are scanning all of their paper documents as PDFs, and discarding the originals, to widespread deletion of electronic files once the minimal retention periods have been met. So fast forward to 2016, and we find ourselves as the state archives working with only about 13% of Arkansas state agencies in the preservation of records that have permanent value. Last year, we began working with the governor's office to address the problem. We have a new governor, and our work with the governor's office resulted in an executive order which was issued in February of this year. The executive order mandates that state agencies, offices, and departments have to consult with us on the preservation of records prior to any final disposition. So it's a temporary fix, not a permanent solution, but the executive order has resulted in increased visibility for the state archives, and it's provided us with a platform from which to contact state agencies and start a discussion about records preservation, both paper and electronic. As there are over 200 state agencies in Arkansas, we've found that the most effective way to start the conversation is through workshops where we can meet with people in groups. We've held 3 so far this year, and we'll hold 4 more before the year is over, and probably be holding them far into the future with any luck. And the workshops have really provided us with an opportunity to introduce the state archives. Unfortunately, there are agencies that are not familiar with their Arkansas state archives, to talk about the concept of centralized records preservation in the archives, the benefits of that. And of course, we're encouraging agency participation in preserving electronic records through Preservica. I'm going to turn it over to Mary now, who's going to talk about some of the particular challenges that we faced in our decision-making process.
We knew when we started this progress through creating a electronic records preservation program, we knew it was a multifaceted problem that was going to have a multi-step answer. What we knew first, we had to set goals. We determined, starting maybe a couple of years ago, that Arkansas needed a state electronic records preservation program to mitigate the damage from our non-comprehensive retention schedules and the lack of awareness among state agencies about electronic records care. We knew that the state agencies would be our primary record creators, and that the purpose of the electronic records program would have to be to preserve and maintain their important long-term electronic records for both use by the agencies and the public, and for the sake of recording the agency's own histories.
A successful program would involve building a digital repository that provides for Arkansas state agencies' electronic records preservation needs, offers greater government transparency and access for the public, as well as adheres to the Open Archival Information System reference model for the ingest and processing, storage, and access of electronic records. And we hope that the program would also lead to more comprehensive retention schedules and a better overall records management system for the state of Arkansas in the future. We wanted to make sure who was going to be responsible for different parts of this program, and determined that our archival manager for technology and access, that's me, would head the electronic records management preservation program supported by our digital archivist. We knew that we would not be expecting additional funding for this program, so for this first year we've decided to fund it for ourselves, but because we did this, we knew we'd need buy-in from our records creators to show the need for this program in the future to help secure future funding. To this end, we organized an ongoing series of monthly state records workshops for Arkansas state agencies, answering questions about the purpose of the state archives, the services we offer, Arkansas's record retention laws, as well as educating them on best practices in the care of physical and electronic records, and information on how to transfer records to the state archives. We knew that securing their willingness to contribute and engendering their goodwill would help establish the longevity of this program. We've met some agencies who are overjoyed to receive our information and our services, but also we've also met with some resistance from other agencies. We've also worked with our IT department to figure out what sort of software solutions would be possible and permissible in Arkansas, which operating systems that state computers could work on, whether local storage would be the best option or whether cloud storage would be possible. We also investigated various digital preservation software options, of course. To this end, we used online resources like the Power Tool Grid and the community-owned Digital Preservation Tool Registry to determine what preservation software or combinations of software would best meet our needs and stay within our budget. We also attended workshops and presentations by representatives of other state archives who had been starting electronic records preservation programs as well as attending webinars like this one. Using other states' research in addition to our own kind of helps us get an idea of what to expect. Just in the last 2 months, we determined that Preservica provided the most comprehensive all-in-one approach to providing electronic records preservation to our state agencies and acquired the Preservica Cloud Edition. Since then, we've been scheduling staff training to utilize Preservica, as well as we're setting up the foundation for our electronic records preservation and access workflows. With our ongoing state records workshops, we've also been meeting with state agencies to address their specific needs and set up transfer plans. We are essentially on the 4th step of the 5-step journey to digital preservation that Michael was talking about earlier. But we're looking forward to beginning ingest of electronic state records in the next month or so. We know that in our situation we need to be able to address specific challenges that we face. Our lack of mandate, we work by the goodwill of our records creators, and we know that in our situation we need to raise awareness of the state archives and what it can do for our state agencies, as well as letting them know the importance of these good electronic records management and preservation practices. Many of the things that we've found that is a big challenge are the great differences in digital record preservation needs among the different agencies. There's a great variety of record types, many different legal restrictions and requirements, file formats, confidentiality requirements that as state archives, we need to make sure that we address in taking care of their electronic records. We also have to make sure we address the need for permanent funding for the program. In our situation, since we did not have funding this year, having good relations with the records creators, we hope will help prove the need for future funding to establish this program. For our tips and recommendations, we knew that in our situation we didn't want to take a "if you make it, they will come" approach. We wanted to get records creators investment on the get records creator invested in the program's outcome, in the services it can offer them. They can be valuable advocates for the program once they see what services the archives can provide them. Also, establish connections with those records creators. Tailor your goals around their needs, and so that it's not just another agency trying to do something, but something that the state archives can offer them. We've had a really good response from the service-based approach. Also, just use the experience and the research of other archives to your organization's benefit. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. And I think that's all. We have our contact information here. If you have any questions or concerns, just let us know.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Brian, for sharing your experiences. That was very fascinating stuff. I think there's probably a few lessons or a few sort of themes coming out there in terms of outreach is important. In getting other agencies and departments to buy in. Transparency can be a strong driver, or providing citizen access can be a strong driver. And so maybe we can pick up on some of those themes when we get to the questions. So I just wanted to finish up before we move on to questions with the final question, which most budget holders are going to ask. What are you actually asking for, and how much is it going to cost? And just a reminder that a digital preservation strategy is not just about the system itself. It's also about people, processes, policies, and the actual the content and the volume of content you're trying to store. But having said that, maybe the system that you do choose can have an impact on people to run the system, whether that's IT resource you need, or it might be technical or development resource you need to run a system. If for example, you decide to build something for yourself, or you go for an on-premise versus a cloud-based solution. So just some considerations there, and just finally, what else should you be considering in terms of the cost and the scope of any system you're looking at? Then try and get as much out of the box as possible. You don't want to be developing connectors to different systems. If you've got connectors for different systems already, so you can take stuff in from other agencies, and that's all good news. Think about support, maintenance, and upgrades to the software, and how that's costed. That's another key thing to think. Think long term. Think sustainability. How the whole, what is going to be the cost of maintaining and developing and growing the system going forward? Is that a shared cost amongst users, or something that the agency itself has to bear? I think, as Mary was saying there, look for active collaboration with other users who are shaping the digital preservation agenda, particularly shaping the state archives agenda. And then finally, as I was saying, access and transparency is often the key, close to sustainability, because you can visibly show all the fantastic work that you're doing, as well as meeting transparency and citizen access mandates. a good example there, as I've got, is the Texas Digital Archive and all the good work they're doing there. So just before we hand over to questions then, just a summary and some next steps. So talk and learn from other organizations, as Mary was saying. Do your outreach, don't just hide away, get out there and understand what what other agencies' needs are. Use some of the tools and templates in a structured way to build your case, and get lots of other advocates joining you as well. And think about not just what you're going to be spending today, but also think about long-term sustainability, which can be helped by being able to provide access, and think about the cost of running and maintaining a system long-term. That brings us towards the end of this webinar. It's also the end of the series. It's been fantastic running this series with CoSA. So do recap some of the webinars if you get a chance. They're all the recordings are up on the statearchivist.org website. You can see the link there. Also, if any of you are interested in kind of getting hands-on with Preservica and with the whole digital preservation process, then we're going to be at SAA in San Antonio, and on Wednesday we're running a sort of from theory to practice kind of workshop where we're going to have facilitators from other organizations as well as Preservica facilitators working with groups to look at the preservation process end to end and looking at how Preservica sort of addresses that. So if you want to be involved in that, then drop me an email, michael.hope@preservica.com. Unfortunately, it does clash with the CoSA working group, but if you're not going to be participating in that, then you're most welcome to join us in our workshop on the Wednesday. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over for questions. And as I said, you can enter these in the chat box. Address your questions to myself or to any of our speakers today. Anybody got any questions for our speakers? Can you see anything coming in, Camille? I can't see the chat box.
We just got one. Got a question. How do you get IT on board with what you're doing?
Anybody want to take that one?
I'll at least answer for South Carolina. For us, it's been relatively easy because we have an internal IT staff. So they certainly came to recognize what the department was doing. In a larger sense, I've heard stories from other states regarding centralized IT, and I know it's a much more difficult thing. The IT professionals I've worked with that at the state level at least have recognized the need for digital preservation, whether or not they're entirely interested in it. I know that doesn't quite answer your question, but at least IT professionals, in my experience, understand the issue, whether or not it's central to their mission to deal with it or not. So just speaking to them at a minimum is at least a start to open that door.
Yeah, it's something, as Michael here, it's something that nearly every organization comes up against. IT don't tend to necessarily understand the subtleties, as I think, as Brian has been saying, between the difference between backup and as Alan said, the difference between backup and digital preservation, what digital preservation is in terms of file format, migration, and often their answer is, you've got SharePoint, that's good enough, off you go. So I think it's important to bring them get them involved early on. Some of our customers find it useful to also share some of the Preservica white papers and other information with IT early on, so they can understand what preservation is all about. and it's one of our missions to get IT to understand what preservation is all about. I'm not sure if you might have seen on the front of Government Computer News recently was the whole Texas story with Ghislaine. You know, that's right into the heart of IT sort of decision makers, and that's something we're going to continue to keep doing.
Yeah, this is Alan. I would agree, and very early on in the process, the University of Connecticut libraries, they have their own internal IT, but they also that IT staff works very closely with their university IT, so they were brought on board literally from day one to help with all of the hardware, and they're very active in the technical roadmap discussion group. That's basically them and the 2 CTDA staff members, partial staff members. We recently have been bringing our state library internal IT staff into it more as we start to get into that. We need to start ingesting stuff so we can move away from some of these other platforms somewhat or completely. And so having them to kind of handle this isn't working on my machine, but also having them understand how the system works and how things sort of interact. So, and then as far as our statewide IT, we are in the process of doing electronic content management system statewide through the IBM FileNet repository and their Atlas retention module. So we have at least a few people in statewide IT who understand and have regular discussions with their higher ups and stuff. So it just, you know, talking to them is a big thing, and stressing digital preservation over the backup, which they start to get and understand. And there's a few other in the statewide IT too that start to think about, I've got all these things, what are we going to do about it? So taking up server space, and you know, it's just a lot. So
great, thanks, Alan. I think there's another question there from Linda. Doesn't South Carolina also have on-prem? Can you take that, Brian? Brian's on mute.
Sorry about that. No, Linda, we do not have on-premises Preservica. Yes, we host our own standard edition or version of Preservica rather than the cloud version. So one of our infrastructure deals was to build the hardware capability to do that. And so the IT staff that we have on staff, the IT department that we have on staff at the department here at the archives, has been instrumental in helping us design that system. And so it's been invaluable to us, especially when we come to speaking to agencies trying to get buy-in from them, that we can stipulate that we host it here in South Carolina using our own staff. Now, that's not to say that the cloud edition is any different than the standard edition or better. One's better than the other. It's just that's the option we decided to go with in South Carolina, and so far it's been invaluable in terms of talking to state agencies.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Any more questions? Now's your chance. It's very good timing for being top of the hour. Okay. Shall we? So I can't see any more questions unless anybody can see any more.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any more.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you to Camille for hosting us, but in particular, thank you to Alan, Brian, Lisa, and Mary for sharing their experiences. I hope you've all found that useful in terms of helping to formulate your ideas and formulate your plans. So do have a look at some of the resources and some of the links which have been shared. Because as Camille said, if you fill out the short survey when you exit the session, we'll make sure you get get you a copy of the slides. So thank you once again, everybody. Thank you for joining us through this series of webinars and workshops, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon. Take care.